Swayam Prabha. Digital India. Educated India.
Namaskar. You have stepped into a course that is going to change the way that you look at data. Not just how you analyze it, but also how you communicate it. My name is Nivid Desai. I serve as the Program Executive at Writing Studio IIT Gandhinagar. Welcome to Writing for Data Science. This course is at the intersection of analysis and communication. As all of us know, data analysis is not just about coding and models. It is about solving real-world problems. And that is exactly why every single thought that goes into solving those problems needs to be communicated. And not just to one audience, across multiple stakeholders. That is where this course comes in. This course prepares you with the foundations of writing, especially curated for data science. We will discuss audience analysis, critical thinking, logical reasoning, as well as storytelling that is native to data science. So join me on a journey at the intersection of numbers and narratives. I'll see you in class. Namaste, hello and welcome to Writing for Data Science. My name is Nivid Desai and we are on a journey to explore the interesting intersections between numbers and narratives. Today, we are taking one step forward in our journey of understanding the art and craft of storytelling. A very important component of any story, be it within or without data, is something that is waiting for us today. Characters. Today, we are looking at characters, especially in data stories. We will see who they are, what they do, and why they matter. But first, let me give you a brief primer in what do we mean when we use the word character. I understand that most of us will intuitively understand the word character, but within storytelling and more specifically within data storytelling, characters hold a special meaning. So let me give you a brief primer, just a recall of what we mutually agree to understand with the term character. So what are characters in stories? In traditional storytelling, characters are who we follow. They are the vehicles that help us navigate through the story. They struggle, they grow, they triumph, or they fail. And that is what holds our attention. That helps us stay focused on the matter of the story. Characters help us connect emotionally because every character will have some or the other characteristics. That is where the word comes from. These characteristics help us resonate with who we are as people and helps us connect emotionally with their own journeys, their own struggles, and their own triumphs. They give us someone or something to care about. These two words are important. Notice how we are discussing someone or something, meaning a character does not necessarily need to be a human character. They can be a non-human character as well. Could be an animal, could be an object, or in our case, could be a data point. They carry the message of the story through their journey. Otherwise, stories will boil down to being mere philosophies. They turn into stories because someone is going through a journey. Something is happening to them and they are responding to the situation. That is how a story moves forward. And that agent of choice is our character. Here's a reflection point for you. Can you remember a news article or a report that moved you? What was the human face or character that made it memorable? It could be about an event, but if it is memorable, there is a high chance that there was a human face or a character associated with that story that made it memorable for you. Now let us look at characters in our specific purpose definition within data stories. We have looked at characters in a general purpose storytelling understanding, but in this case, we will need to expand the definition a little bit. In data storytelling, we don't always have people, but we can always have something that we can turn into a character. Who can be characters in data stories? When I say that we don't always have people, it does not mean that we absolutely do not have people. The first instance, let me pick up people. Individuals, groups, personas, any of them can become characters. Then there are communities, communities of people, farmers, students, patients, anyone whom we are talking about in terms of our analysis becomes a character. Now that we have discussed our mutually understood and agreed upon definition of a character, let me start expanding it into objects or non-human characters. Let's look at systems. A supply chain can be a character. Education system can be a character. Climate models can be a character. If you think about it, every character will have their own characteristics. And if you can think about a supply chain or the education system or the climate model, they will have their own strengths and weaknesses. We can very well turn them into characters based on the kinds of strengths and weaknesses that we notice within systems. Now, let us look at the second instance of a non-human character. Data points. Any recurring anomaly, any recurring outlier, or any trend can be a character. Because in all of these cases, like we have built a common principle, they will have some or the other characteristics. If the word characteristic becomes a little difficult to understand, think about strengths and weaknesses. Anything or anyone can have strengths and weaknesses. Turning that into some kind of characteristic will give you a character at the end of the day. Let's look at some examples. The example that I am taking for this one is data-driven healthcare in Bihar. In 2015, a pilot project in Bihar empowered ASHA workers with mobile data entry tools to track maternal and child health visits. Over time, the data began revealing clusters of high risk pregnancies. Instead of just showing the problem, data scientists worked with local governments to convert this insight into targeted healthcare delivery. By 2018, maternal mortality in pilot areas had decreased due to timely interventions. If you see this story, there are multiple characters involved. There is, of course, the ASHA workers. There are, of course, the data scientists. There are, of course, mothers involved who are at a high risk pregnancy. The character in this story isn't just the mother or the health worker. If you think about the non-human aspect, it is also the mobile platform and the data trail that informed the life-saving decisions. So if you want to turn them into characters and if you want to move them around the narrative in a way that affects the kind of emotion that your audience will feel, they will necessarily turn into characters for your story. Let us now look at why characters matter in data stories. Data stories can just be about numbers. We have looked at arcs and narrative structures that already work. Then why should we do a deep dive into characters? First of all, characters anchor your story. Even if it has a structure or even if it has an arc, there needs to be an agent, a vehicle through which your readers and viewers and audience will access the story. They need something to follow, right? They need a trail and they need a journey on that trail. So, in that case, somebody or something will need to take that journey, right? That is where a character enters. And because these characters, be it human or non human, they have relatable factors with your audience, they elicit empathy. Numbers are abstract, But people are relatable. Even non human characters, if you talk about their strengths and weaknesses, they turn into relatable entities for your audience to follow and associate with at an empathetic level. Characters also make insights memorable. We remember stories, not spreadsheets, something that I have spoken about in the previous few lectures. We always remember the journey that somebody else has taken or we ourselves have taken. So, if we associate with a character, we can put ourselves in the shoes, feel empathetically, and understand and remember the kind of journey that the character in a data story is taking. Then they drive narrative action. Once you understand that characters are about agency, choice, and action, the kind of narrative direction that your data story takes is driven by a character. Characters create tension and movement based on the choices that they make, based on the changes that they go through. They will move across a path in a story to drive the narrative design of your entire story. That is why characters become the key source through which your audience will access the story. And that is the reason we are doing a deep dive in characters. They matter because they are the anchor of our story. Let's take a case study. Pratham is a renowned platform that publishes the annual Status of Education Report, ASA. So, in their annual Status of Education report, rather than stating that only 47% of grade 5 students can read a grade 2 text, the annual Status of Education report shares stories of individual children and schools. They can report the data as it is. The data will not change. But the wrapping of the data, the way that the data has been packaged, will affect the audience differently. These choices of turning data reports into stories, into characters, and into journeys, they humanize the statistics. They give a face to the number that you see, and they help policymakers see the urgency that is arising from this insight. Otherwise, if you turn it into a pure report of the data, as in stating it as a fact, the policymaker may not be able to see how urgent it is that they need to take an action on this situation. Turning them into stories makes them even more persuasive and even more immediate in terms of actionability. Here's a reflection question that I want you to think about. Why might a data story without a character feel cold or forgettable? Now that we have understood the importance of characters, think about it from that perspective also. If there were no characters, if it was only a report of the data, why would it feel cold? And why would people not remember it? We don't only need to take the understanding of why characters matter at a surface level. We also need to see what would happen if characters were not there. So, let's make our entire understanding watertight by imagining characters' presence as well as the character's absence. So, think about what would happen if there were no characters in a data science story. Why would it make it cold and forgettable? Reflect on this question, will you? And I will be back with some techniques to turn data into characters. Now that we have understood what characters are within our specific definition of data science as well, and the importance of characters in making good stories, let us now explore some techniques that can help us turn data points into characters. Number one, start with personas or profiles. You can build fictional but realistic profiles from your data. Personas mean an outline, a sketch of a personality, something that can hold multiple qualities and characteristics together into a coherent sense. That is a persona. And a profile is the same thing, but from a more structured point of view. It can be fictional, but it has to be realistic because it will be the aggregate of your target audience whom you are trying to appease with your narrative. You can combine the demographics, the behaviors, and the pain points. Based on these details, there will come a comprehensive structure of an average person that will reflect the kind of things that your character needs to reflect. Let's look at an example. Ravi, a 24-year-old gig worker in Bengaluru, earns 15,000 rupees monthly, spends 35% on rent, and has not saved in 6 months. This is a persona. If you see, there is the age group in terms of demographic, there is the physical location also in terms of demographic, there is the income bracket, there is the rent percentage that they pay, and there is the challenge of not saving in 6 months. All of these details are structured into one average person's idea. That is what we mean by creating personas or profiles. So, just like we created Ravi out of these different kinds of data points, you can create a persona or a profile to match the kind of data audience that you are talking about. Now that you have a character to work with, you can create movement and emotion. You track the change in data over time and let the character evolve with those changes. In this case, you highlight the conflict, you highlight the barriers, or any transformation that the character would go through. The same persona or profile that we have built will go through different variable changes as the story goes forward. That is where you track those changes and let the character evolve naturally. You will highlight some conflicts, you will highlight some barriers, or the transformation that the character takes. This journey right here is what makes a character memorable. It is what makes a character empathetic. For example, in 2020, the Yamuna River had 7 times higher ammonia than safe levels. But by 2022, with new policies, it had improved by 40%. In this case, the Yamuna River, the character, has gone through some change, and we are tracking that change with the data and the time. That is what creates movement in a story, and eventually it causes emotion in your audiences. Let's do a little exercise. Pick a trend in education, health, or environment. Write 2 or 3 lines as if it were a character speaking or changing over time. That will help you realize how to turn non human entities like a trend into a character. Because a trend is essentially the pattern of a change. And change is something that we humans also go through. So, if you want to associate strengths and weaknesses to a trend, it'll be easier to turn it into a character and help them speak. Give them some dialogue lines and help them talk about how they have changed over time. Now that we have understood how to craft one character, let us expand our entire vision. Why not craft a cast? Why not craft more than one character? Think of your data story as having a cast of characters, just like a film or a TV series. Each character plays a role. You don't only have one protagonist. Of course, you have the protagonist, but you also have the side character. You have the antagonist also. All of these are different roles within a wide cast of characters. If you understand these words, protagonist, antagonist, then you already know something about storytelling. But if they are new words, don't worry. Let us explore them together. A protagonist is the main subject. For example, a student struggling with online education. A protagonist is not the same as a hero. Please be careful. A protagonist is the focal character. They are the person or the entity whom we are tracking through a story. They can be a villain as well, but they are the focal point of our story. That is a protagonist. The antagonist is the barrier, anything that is the obstacle in the journey of a protagonist. So think of it this way: a protagonist is moving forward, and then there is a barrier in the middle. Now, the protagonist will have to do something to overcome that barrier. That barrier is known as the antagonist. If we carry on the example that we just established, a lack of internet access for a student struggling with online education will be the antagonist. Now, there is a supporting cast of characters, entities or people who help the protagonist in moving forward. These are allies in terms of people or systems who can facilitate a protagonist in moving forward. For example, teachers, apps, or NGOs who can support our protagonist, the student, in making a better use of technology to bridge that gap of online education. Let's understand this with an example. Probably that will help us associate these abstract concepts to a concrete approach. Let's look at agriculture technology, agri-tech. Our protagonist, the marginal farmer, is struggling to grow the crops, reap the crops, and get good money in exchange. In this case, the antagonist can be inconsistent rainfall because that is the biggest barrier in our protagonist's progress. Now, there is a supporting character that we can introduce, which is a mobile weather alert system that can help our protagonist plan their entire sowing and reaping in a proper manner. This is where a data story turns into a cast of characters. There is a protagonist, there is an antagonist, and there is a supporting character. Now, how to move these characters around? You have already learned this in the structures and arcs lecture. That is why I wanted to get done with that first and then arrive at the characters. We've already learned how to move these pieces around. But who are these pieces and what do they do? That is what this deep dive is about. Here's a little reflection for you. What roles might your data characters be playing in your story? Take up anything that you have done with data, trying to turn it into a story, you will come across some characters. Try to recognize the roles that they are playing. Who is the protagonist? Who is the antagonist? Who are the supporting characters? All of these will turn into a comprehensive cast of characters. And then you will decide, based on the arc that you want to take, of what role would what character play. In the end, I want to emphasize that characters humanize your data stories. They turn our data stories into a human endeavor. They bring empathy, clarity, and memorability to your message. Characters can be people, systems, or even trends. They don't necessarily need to be human entities in order to humanize the stories. But they need movement, they need conflict, and they need resolution. They help translate abstract data, just statistics and numbers, into real world impact. And that impact feels resonant with your audience because they have associated empathetically with your character. Let your characters carry the weight of your insight. Data becomes powerful when someone or something carries it forward. And that is the job that your characters will do in your data story. So that was it from my side for today's lecture. We were looking at characters and their role within a data story. We checked out who are characters, what do they do, and why they matter. We also learned some techniques to create characters and help them navigate through our data stories. I hope that this toolkit has equipped you with more nuance and skill sets to turn your data into a narrative pattern. In the next lecture, we will continue our deep dives into various topics across data, and I hope that it continues to enrich our entire knowledge database of how we turn numbers into narratives. Thank you so much for joining me today. Until the next class, all the best, stay curious, and keep learning. I will see you very soon. Thank you. Namaskar.